The plate sat there, cold and quiet under a sheet of plastic wrap. Mashed potatoes, turkey, a single biscuit, arranged like someone cared. But I knew better. It wasn't love. It was guilt, delivered late and left on the counter like a chore. The tree blinked in the corner, the only sound in that hollow house. No footsteps. No laughter. Just me, and that plate. I stared at it for hours. They didn't forget me. They chose to leave me behind. Sometimes I see families at the grocery store. Women my age with grandchildren tugging at their sleeves, sons holding shopping lists. I don't flinch. I don't ache. Because I gave that part of myself fully. I lived it. I loved it. And now I've laid it down with grace. Margaret visits often. We share casseroles and stories. She brings puzzles. I bring tea. We don't talk about what was. We talk about what is, the weather, the garden, the neighbor who plays harmonica too late into the night. And every once in a while, she touches my hand and says, "You look lighter." And I do. I've started writing again, just little things. Reflections. Letters I don't send. Thoughts I once held in the corners of my mind now find their way to the page. One line I wrote last week keeps returning to me. There's dignity in choosing peace, even if you have to walk away from noise to find it. That's what I did. I didn't run. I returned. To myself. To my breath. To the woman I was before I began apologizing for taking up space. I haven't heard from my son since the letter. And that's all right. Sometimes the distance teaches more than closeness ever could. Maybe one day he'll understand. Maybe he won't. But I no longer live in the maybe. I live in the now. And now is warm. Quiet. Mine. Sometimes, late in the evening, I sit on the porch with a blanket across my knees and watch the sun dip behind the trees. The light turns gold, then pink, then lavender. And in that fading hush, I remember the woman I almost became. The one who would have stayed silent. The one who would have kept shrinking, folding herself into smaller corners, hoping to be loved by people who had long stopped looking. But I didn't become her. I became someone else, someone quiet, yes, but unbreakable. I learned that dignity doesn't come from being needed. It comes from knowing your own worth, even when no one else remembers it. And as I water the rosemary and watch the marigolds open to the morning sun, I carry no anger. Just a gentle knowing. They locked me in a garage so someone else could sleep in my bed. And I walked out, with the deed in my hand, and the last piece of myself finally reclaimed. I still dream sometimes, not of the old house, but of laughter, soft and real, echoing in rooms where I am not afraid to be seen. And I wake up smiling. If you're reading this and you've ever felt small or unwanted, or placed behind a door like an afterthought, I want you to hear me. You are not in the way. You are not invisible. You are not done. Your life still matters. Your voice still holds weight. And if you've ever had to choose between being quiet and being whole, I hope you choose yourself. Every time. If you've ever felt unseen or forgotten, remember, your worth doesn't depend on their understanding. Share your story in the comments. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Comment below. Snow had started falling the night before, soft and thick, like a quilt settling over the street. I watched it from the same window I've stared out of for over 40 years. The street lamp out front flickered, casting pale yellow light onto the empty sidewalk. I used to wait there, right by the glass, watching for their cars to pull up on Christmas morning. Red minivans, little boots spilling out, arms full of gifts and noise. Now it was just quiet. The kind that isn't peaceful. The kind that presses in. I'm 78 now. My knees don't let me move as fast, and my hands have lost their steadiness. But my mind, my mind still remembers everything. The smell of cinnamon rolls in the oven when the kids were little. The way Harold would whistle while he wrapped presents in the basement, always using too much tape. Harold's been gone 12 years this January. Cancer. The quick kind. One day we were walking through the grocery store, laughing over who forgot the eggs. And 3 months later, I was standing beside a closed casket, holding my youngest daughter's hand, trying not to crumble. After that, I held the family together with both hands. I made the pies, hosted every Thanksgiving and Christmas, wrapped gifts, called the grandkids, mailed birthday cards. Even when my hip surgery made it hard to stand too long, I still cooked. Still set the table with the good silver. I never wanted them to feel the hole he left. And for a while it worked. They came. Every year. With their noise and chaos and new babies. They brought folding chairs and extra blankets, and we squeezed around my little table. I didn't mind the mess. I loved it. Every dish in the sink meant someone was still choosing me. But slowly, like a tide going out, they stopped. It started small. "We're doing Thanksgiving at Sarah's this year, Mom. Easier for the kids." I understood. I nodded. Then it was Easter. Then birthdays. Then 2 years ago, Christmas. "We just thought it'd be simpler, Mom. Less driving. You don't need to stress yourself out." Stress. As if I ever minded the work. As if baking cookies for my grandchildren was a burden. Last year they came by for an hour. 1 hour. They dropped off presents, barely sat down. My grandson never took off his coat. When they left, I stood in the doorway with a bag of Tupperware leftovers, waving at taillights that didn't pause once. This year they didn't come at all. The morning had started with a flutter of hope. It always does. I got up early, washed my face, put on the red cardigan Harold liked. Brushed my hair back the way my daughter used to compliment. Set the table, just in case. You never want to be caught unprepared. I even made Harold's favorite, stuffing with celery and apples. Not because anyone asked for it, but because it made the house smell like old times. When the clock struck noon and no one had arrived, I told myself maybe they were running late. Maybe a storm slowed them down. By 2, I sat down on the couch. The house still smelled like food, but the air had gone flat. At 3:30, the doorbell rang. My heart jumped. I shuffled to the door as fast as I could, my slippers nearly slipping on the tile. But it wasn't them. It was a neighbor girl, paid to drop off a plate. Wrapped in foil, no note. No explanation. Just silence wrapped in aluminum. I didn't cry. Not then. I just nodded, thanked her, and closed the door. The plate went on the counter. The tree lights blinked behind me. I stood there for a long time, hand on the sink, staring at the food like it might speak up and explain everything. But it didn't. My house is small, tucked on a quiet street in the Midwest. The kind of place where mailmen wave and everyone knows whose porch light stays on too long. It was never fancy, just ours. We bought it in 1972. Raised 3 kids here. Painted the kitchen twice. Buried a cat out back under the lilac bush. Now it's too quiet. My children don't live far, 2 in the next town over, 1 about an hour away. Not far enough to excuse absence. Not far enough to forget your mother on Christmas. I've always believed in grace. In giving people room to be flawed. But there's a difference between being busy and being unwilling. Between forgetting and choosing not to show up. I know that now. It's not that they didn't have time. It's that they didn't want to make time. And that realization, it broke something inside me that day. Not loudly. Not with shouting or slammed doors. But quietly. Like a photograph curling in the sun. It didn't start with Christmas. That was just the loudest silence. The smaller things came first. Things that are easy to excuse if you're the kind of person who's used to forgiving. Which I am. Or which I was. I remember the first time it stung. My birthday 2 years ago. 76. I baked my own cake, lemon with whipped cream frosting, just how I like it. I even lit the candles myself, stood in front of the mirror in the hallway, and sang the song under my breath. I chuckled at how foolish I looked. But I still made a wish. Only one of the kids called. And even she sounded rushed, like she was on her way to something more important. "Sorry, Mom, I meant to call earlier," she said. I told her it was fine. I always do. But after the call ended, I sat at the kitchen table, sliced the cake, and chewed slowly while the house echoed back nothing at all. Little by little, they stopped inviting me to things. Family dinners, movie nights, baby showers. They'd say, "We didn't think you'd want to come all that way." Or, "It's just a small thing." Small thing. As if the small things weren't what I lived for. My granddaughter graduated last spring. I found out about it on Facebook. A photo, cap, gown, glittery shoes. Her parents stood on either side beaming. No mention of me. Not even a tag. When I asked my daughter about it, she said, "Oh, Mom, we didn't think you'd enjoy sitting in the heat that long." I smiled, nodded, and hung up the phone. Then I closed the curtains and sat in the dark for a long while. That's how it is with people who forget your value. They don't shout it. They whisper it in absences. In glances. In all the things they stop saying. Last Thanksgiving, they asked me to stay home to rest. My youngest daughter said, "We just want you to relax, Mom. You deserve a break." I told her thank you. I even meant it, for a second. Until I realized, I wasn't being offered rest. I was being replaced. They didn't ask me to make the pie. Didn't ask for my stuffing recipe. Didn't ask anything at all. And so I sat at home, with a quiet meal and a little candle burning by the sink. I told myself it was okay. They're busy, they have their own lives. But deep down, something started shifting. It's a strange thing to go from being the center of your family to the edge of it. You don't even notice when it happens. Not at first. You're just busy helping, supporting, stepping aside so others can shine. You think you're being generous, gracious. But then one day you look around, and no one's looking back. No one asks how you're feeling. No one asks what you want. They just assume you'll be fine. Alone. And the worst part, you almost believe them. One Sunday, I overheard my son telling his wife on the phone. He thought I'd gone upstairs. She's just not as sharp as she used to be. I stood in the hallway, my hand on the banister, and let those words settle into my bones. Not angry, just numb. Not as sharp. I still do my own taxes. I still pay my bills on time. I still bake from scratch. But to them, I'm someone to worry about, not someone to listen to. I started noticing more things after that. The way they talked over me at dinner. The way they picked restaurants I couldn't hear well in. How they posted family updates online, but never called to share them with me first. My voice didn't matter. And when your voice doesn't matter, neither does your presence. They'd bring leftovers sometimes, half-eaten trays wrapped in foil. No explanation. Just we had extra. Like I was a second thought. A box to check off. My fridge became a gallery of their scraps. Their excess. Their guilt. And yet, I kept saying thank you. Because I didn't want to be the bitter one. Didn't want to guilt them. But gratitude given too long, too blindly, starts to feel like begging. Still, I didn't say a word. I told myself they were good people. That they loved me. That they didn't mean to forget. I held tight to the good memories, Sunday dinners with Harold, the sound of toy trains under the tree, the scent of pine needles on little hands. But memories can't keep you warm when love starts moving on without you. I was a fixture, a photograph on the wall, something to be proud of, but not included. And every little slight, every unreturned call, every missed moment, it piled up inside me. Not like anger, like dust, quiet, settling in corners. Until that Christmas morning, when the weight of it all made me realize I hadn't just been forgotten. I'd been set aside. I laid my clothes out the night before, a soft gray blouse with little pearl buttons, the red cardigan Harold gave me our last Christmas together. I'd even ironed the sleeves. Old habits don't fade, even when no one notices them. I dabbed a bit of rose-scented lotion on my wrists, brushed my hair back neatly, and pinned it with the silver barrette my youngest gave me years ago. I did it all slowly, with the kind of care you give to sacred things. I set the table, 2 places out of stubborn hope. I thought maybe one of them would surprise me. Maybe someone would remember how much I love the way snow looks from the front window, with a warm plate in hand, a little jazz playing on the radio, voices rising and falling around the table. I made everything from scratch, just like I always did. The turkey was smaller this year, of course, just a little breast rubbed in butter and sage. Mashed potatoes, rolls, cranberry sauce from the can because that's what my son always liked. I made my famous green bean casserole. Even added the little crunchy onions, just the way the grandkids used to sneak them off the top before dinner. By 11, everything was ready. By noon, the candles were lit. By 1, the food was cooling. By 2, I opened a window. The smell was too much for a room so empty. At 3, I sat down. Ate 1 roll. Sipped 1 glass of cider. Then I stopped. I wrapped the plate meant for someone else in plastic and set it on the counter. It felt too cold, even before the air touched it. I didn't cry. Not then. I just sat in my chair, back straight, hands folded. Not praying. Just breathing. The radio was still playing, soft instrumentals, the kind that fill the silence but never fix it. The tree blinked behind me, blinking for no one. That's when I knew. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't forgetfulness. It wasn't busyness or bad timing or bad weather. It was a choice. They had chosen their version of the day, and I wasn't in it. I wasn't part of the picture anymore. And that kind of knowing, it doesn't scream. It settles. Quietly. Like dust over old furniture. I stared at that untouched plate, the food growing limp beneath the plastic. They had sent me a meal like a patient. Like a responsibility. And yet, I had cooked for them. I had laid out the best dishes, just in case. Had placed the old cloth napkins folded like always, hoping they'd come. They didn't. They didn't even call. No knock on the door. No voice crackling through the hallway. Just a text message. Hope you're having a nice day, Mom. We're at Susan's, love you. A message written with one hand, probably while holding a cup of cider or juggling a toddler. No photo, no invitation. Just digital proof that I had not been forgotten, only excluded. That was the moment something settled inside me. Not rage, not bitterness, but stillness. A clarity that left no room for denial. All my life, I gave my time, my hands, my youth, my patience. I gave when I was tired. I gave when I was grieving. I gave even when no one said thank you. Because I believed that love, real love, was about showing up. And now, when I needed the simplest thing, presence, they gave me distance. Wrapped in foil. Labeled as kindness. But kindness isn't quieting someone out of convenience. It isn't asking them to understand over and over, without ever trying to understand them in return. I looked around my kitchen. Every cabinet, every drawer, every corner had a piece of our life in it. The height marks on the wall near the pantry. All 3 kids, summers marked in pencil. The chipped plate from Harold's favorite breakfast set. The ornament with our wedding date, still hanging on the tree. I had made a home. Not just a house, a home. And now I sat in it like a stranger. That's what betrayal looks like, when it wears its quietest face. It doesn't slam doors. It simply stops opening them. I sat there until the sun sank behind the neighbor's fence, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor. And in that soft darkness, I whispered to myself, not a vow, not a threat, just a truth. They left me behind. So I must now decide what I carry forward. And who? That night, I didn't sleep much. The house made its usual sounds, the furnace clicking on, the wind brushing past the gutters, the pipes settling in the walls like old bones. I lay beneath my quilt, staring at the faint outline of the ceiling fan, thinking about the years that had brought me here. I didn't cry. Not like the kind in movies, with sobs and shaking shoulders. Mine came quiet, in warm little streams down my cheeks, with no sound at all. They dried before I could even wipe them away. When morning came, I moved slowly, but differently. Not from age, not from sadness, but from something new. A kind of stillness I hadn't felt before. Something closer to clarity. I made tea. Toasted a slice of bread. The butter melted just right. I didn't rush through it like I usually do when I know someone might call or show up. No one would be coming today. That was certain. The table was still set for 2 from the day before. I stood there for a moment, looking at that second plate, and then I quietly cleared it. Folded the napkin. Washed the fork and knife. Put them back where they belonged. There was no announcement. No dramatic moment. Just a small shift. A private decision. I went to the hall closet, pulled down an old cardboard box labeled important. Inside was a notebook. Faded blue cover, pages soft at the corners. I'd called it my plans years ago, back when Harold was still here, back when we used to dream about RV trips and maybe a little cabin by the lake. We never got around to either. Life had other ideas. And after he passed, the notebook sat untouched. Just a relic of ideas that felt too far away. But that morning I opened it. The pages smelled like old paper and forgotten hope. I flipped past the first few lists, places to visit, things to do before 70, recipes to try, and found a blank page. I picked up a pen. At the top I wrote, what I still want. And then slowly I started writing. Not big things. Not wild things. Just small, real ones. Learn to use the library computer. Send a letter to Eleanor. Eat breakfast by the window every morning. Visit the botanical garden on my birthday. Make peace with being alone, not as punishment, but as possibility. I stared at that last one for a while. And then I underlined it. I used to think my life existed only in relation to others. That my value came from how useful I was to them. As a mother, a grandmother, a hostess, a keeper of traditions. But maybe, just maybe, there was still something of me that belonged only to me. The thought was strange. And quiet. But not unwelcome. I spent the afternoon differently than I had the day before. I didn't keep checking the clock. I didn't look at my phone. I didn't replay conversations in my head, wondering if I'd done something wrong. Instead, I changed the sheets on my bed, the winter ones with the little blue flowers. I lit a candle, cinnamon and clove. I opened a new puzzle I'd been saving for months. For dinner, I made soup. Just enough for me. I ate slowly, listening to the wind against the windows. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something. That evening, I called Eleanor. She's 81 now, sharp as ever, living in a retirement condo 2 towns over. We used to talk every week, but it had been months. No reason. Just time slipping through fingers. She answered on the second ring. We talked for over an hour. About books. About her new cat. About how the world feels lonelier than it used to, but somehow, the small joys matter more now. Before hanging up, she said, "Come visit. We'll have coffee and pretend we're young again." I smiled at that. I said I would. And I meant it. When I hung up, I looked around the room. Same furniture. Same curtains. Same silence. But everything felt just a little different. I wasn't invisible. Not to myself. They had left me behind, yes. But I was still here. Still breathing. Still wanting. Still mine. That night, before bed, I added one more thing to the list in my notebook. Leave a life that reflects who I really am, not just who they needed me to be. I underlined that one twice. Have you ever felt invisible in your own home? Let me know in the comments. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. It wasn't because I had somewhere to be or someone to make breakfast for. Not anymore. It was because I felt something stirring inside me. A small current, like the kind you feel right before the seasons change. I pulled back the curtain and looked out. The snow was still there, soft and perfect across the yard, untouched except for the small bird tracks near the feeder. The world looked clean, honest, and I felt, for the first time in years, that maybe it was okay to begin again. After tea, I took out the old folder from the filing cabinet, the one labeled Documents. It had everything. The will Harold and I made in 1991, the insurance information, the house deed, social security letters, the old power of attorney form that was never updated after he died. I sat at the dining table, sorting through each piece, my fingers steady. I made 2 piles. What's mine to decide now and what they think is theirs. It wasn't an act of revenge. I didn't feel angry. I just felt ready. Ready to stop letting others decide who I was and what I owed them. I called Mr. Latham's office, the lawyer Harold and I used when we bought the house. His secretary answered, warm as ever, and said he'd retired, but his daughter Rebecca had taken over the practice. "I can come in this week," I said. Quietly. "I just need to update some things." She asked no questions. I was thankful for that. The next day, I took the bus into town. I wore my good coat, navy blue with the silver buttons, and the boots I'd been saving for a winter visit that never came. The wind bit a little, but I didn't mind it. It reminded me I was still alive. Rebecca met me in a quiet room filled with light and shelves lined with books. She had kind eyes. Didn't rush me. Let me speak in my own time. I told her what I wanted, to update my will, to move my accounts into a trust with specific terms, and to designate my new power of attorney. Not to my children, but to someone else. Someone I could trust. I named Eleanor. And as I said her name, I felt something open inside me. A door that had been shut for years. We spent an hour going through the documents. She made no judgments, just asked clear, respectful questions. I told her I didn't want drama. I just wanted peace. By the time I left, the papers were signed, notarized, and sealed. I stepped outside into the cold and took a breath so deep, it hurt a little. But it was a good kind of ache. The kind that comes with movement, after too long being still. Back home, I put the new papers in the same folder, now labeled fresh in thick pen. My decisions. I tucked it in the safe, the one behind the bookshelf that no one remembers is there but me. Then I sat down at the kitchen table, opened my notebook, and added 2 more lines under what I still want. Know exactly where I stand. Live from a place of choice, not permission. That evening, I made a cup of peppermint tea and called Eleanor again. "I need a favor," I said. "Anything," she replied. I told her about the power of attorney, how I didn't want the children to feel burdened, and how I needed someone who truly saw me. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "I'm honored, and I'll protect you like my own sister." And just like that, I felt safer. Not just legally, but emotionally. I had made a choice. Quietly, deliberately, and no one could take that from me. A few days later, I invited James, the boy next door, to come by. He's 17, always polite, and often helps me with the lawn when his dad is out of town. I asked if he'd show me how to use the library computer system online. He was delighted to help. Sat patiently beside me as I learned how to search for books, place holds, and even join an online reading group. Before he left, I handed him a small envelope. "What's this for?" he asked. "For your time," I said gently. He opened it, found a crisp $20 bill and a note that said, "Thank you for helping me keep learning." He smiled so wide, it lit up the room. As he left, I realized something. I hadn't waited for permission. Not from my children. Not from anyone. I had simply chosen. To begin. To protect. To grow. In my own way, in my own time. And it felt right. Not loud. Not flashy. Just honest. There's a power in quiet decisions, the kind no one sees coming. Because they think you've settled. They think you've gone soft with age, or lost your sharpness. But all that's happened is that you've learned to move differently. To carry your pain like a folded letter, hidden but not forgotten. And sometimes you learn to write a new one. I hadn't thought of my mother in a long time. Not really. Not in the way that stays with you when the tea's gone cold and the light turns soft on the walls. But after I'd tucked away those new papers and folded the blanket over the arm of the couch just so, she came back to me. Not with a rush, but like a slow breath you didn't know you were holding. It was a Sunday, a late April 1. I was 43, with children still in school, and a part-time job at the fabric store to help make ends meet. Mama was living in a small assisted living center, just across the county line. Not far, 25 minutes door to door, if traffic was light. But still, we didn't go as often as we should have. There was always something. A play, a fundraiser, a leaky pipe, a cold, something that made it easier to stay home. And she never asked, never demanded. Just smiled when we did come, her hands warm but always slightly trembling, like she held too much she didn't speak aloud. That afternoon, I brought her lemon bars, her favorite. I remember because I'd accidentally used powdered sugar instead of flour to dust the pan and laughed when I realized. She didn't mind. Said it tasted like spring. We sat by the window in her room, the one that overlooked the side garden. She wore a pale blue sweater that day, the one with the little pearl buttons I'd always admired as a girl. She was thinner than I remembered, fragile in the wrists, but her eyes still held that quiet knowing. She asked about the kids. I told her they were growing fast. She asked about Harold. I told her he was working too much. She didn't ask about herself. But I saw it, in the way she looked past me sometimes, toward the hallway, as if listening for footsteps that never came. Before I left, she took my hand, those thin, bird-like fingers resting over mine. "You're doing so much," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I nodded. "You don't have to worry about me," she added. And I believed her. I believed she didn't mind. That she understood. That somehow her silence meant acceptance. It wasn't until weeks later, when the call came, when they said she'd passed quietly in her sleep, that I understood. There were no flowers from us on her bedside table. No photos of her grandchildren. Only an old radio, a folded quilt, and a plastic cup half full of water. When I went to gather her things, the nurse gave me a box. Inside it, folded into an envelope, was a birthday card I'd sent months before. Unopened. Untouched. And beside it, her journal. I shouldn't have read it. But I did. Only one entry was written in the last year of her life. I miss the noise. I miss being asked. I miss being part of their day, not just a note in the margins. But I will not beg to be loved. I folded the book closed, held it to my chest, and cried in the car for nearly an hour before I could drive home. I never told my children. Never told Harold. Just buried it, like so many women bury things, beneath casseroles and clean sheets and lists of things to pick up at the store. But now, as I stood in my own quiet kitchen, holding a mug of tea and looking out over snow-touched hedges, I realized how her story had quietly become my own. Not because I meant it to, but because I didn't question the silence. Didn't push against the easing away. I just assumed that love, when it got quiet, still meant the same thing. But now I knew better. Silence is not always gentleness. Sometimes it's surrender. And my mother, she surrendered long before she meant to. I carried that memory with me all day, like a stone in my pocket. Not heavy enough to stop me, but just enough to keep me grounded. That evening, I pulled out a photograph I hadn't touched in years. It was of her, in her garden, hair tucked back in a scarf, dirt on her hands, smiling at a row of crooked tomatoes. I placed it on the mantel, next to Harold, next to the picture of the kids from when they were little, before they grew too busy, too far away. I stood there for a long time, looking at the three of them. Harold, my children, and her, each holding a part of my story, each holding something I gave freely, and sometimes lost in the giving. And I whispered to the quiet, "I see you now, Mama. I see what you carried. And I won't let that be the end of us." Because the truth is, strength isn't loud. Sometimes it's a folded page in a quiet journal. Sometimes it's a woman who makes tea and rewrites her future at 78. And sometimes it's knowing when to stop waiting and start choosing. For her. For me. For the woman I still am. The letter came on a Tuesday. A plain envelope. Thin. Folded neatly with my name typed in the corner, Mrs. Eleanor M. Ward. No return address I recognized. I nearly tossed it in the recycling. Most mail these days is noise, credit card offers, pharmacy flyers, occasional church bulletins. But something about it, maybe the weight, maybe the timing, made me pause. I slid a butter knife gently under the seal. Sat at the kitchen table with the afternoon light softening across the linoleum, and opened it. 2 pages. Official letterhead. Words that started kindly and ended like ice. As part of our processing confirmation, please note that your partial share of the Ward family parcel, Lot 17B, has been formally sold and distributed. All proceeds have been transferred to the authorized signer on file. I stopped reading. I knew that land. Harold's grandfather left it to us, a little patch of forest, 10 acres of quiet pine never developed. We used to walk there in the summer, when the kids were small. Let them climb the fallen logs and toss rocks into the creek. It was in all our names. Equal shares. A memory more than anything now. But mine was still mine. Wasn't it? I looked back at the letter. And there it was, my name, listed as authorized by signature on June 4th. A signature I never gave. I stood up, the chair scraping gently behind me. Went to the drawer, pulled out my old checkbook, flipped to the back cover where my real signature was printed a dozen times over the years. It didn't match. Not even close. This one was rushed, sloppy. A mimic, not a memory. I sat back down, put my hands in my lap, felt the air leave the room in one long, invisible exhale. I didn't need to ask who did it. I already knew. Only one of them ever talked about selling that land. It's just sitting there, Mom, my eldest had said once. We could use it to help pay for Ava's college. I'd said no. Gently, but firmly. It wasn't about money. It was about belonging. About holding something that wasn't bought or sold, only shared. And now it was gone. Not just behind my back. Through my name. I should have shouted. Should have picked up the phone and demanded answers. But instead, I just sat there and folded the letter back into the envelope. Set it beside the cold tea I'd forgotten to drink. And let the grief come. Not loud, but total. Because this wasn't just exclusion. This wasn't a missed birthday or a skipped visit. This was a theft. Of trust. Of dignity. Of me. They had used my silence as permission. My kindness as a blank check. My aging hands as something easy to forge. And in that moment, the pain wasn't just about the land. It was about how small they must think I've become. To believe I wouldn't notice. To believe I wouldn't mind. To believe that what I held, in memory, in meaning, was worth less than a tuition check or a faster solution. I thought about calling Eleanor. I even picked up the phone. But I didn't dial. Some things don't need witnesses. Some betrayals aren't meant to be discussed. Only felt, carried, and used as a map. That night, I went to the cabinet and took out the deed. The original one. The one Harold kept folded in a blue folder, with all our important papers. His handwriting still clear in the margin. Hold for grandchildren. I held it in my lap. Ran my fingers over the ink. And I cried. Not just for what was taken, but for who I had become in their eyes. A signature. A checkbox. A fading photograph in a house no one visits. And still, beneath all that, I felt something else begin to move. Not a fire. Not yet. But a flicker. Of knowing. Of choosing. Of quiet resolve. I placed the deed beside the letter. 2 truths side by side. One, the dream we built. The other, what they did with it. I folded both, slid them into a new envelope, and wrote on the front. What they chose. Then I placed it in my safe beside the folder labeled My Decisions. Because now, I had more decisions to make. They had taken something that mattered. So now, I would take back what was mine. My voice. My worth. My place in this story. Not by shouting. Not by accusing. But by building something they could never forge. A life of my own choosing. After that letter, I stopped explaining. Not in words. Not in actions. Just in presence. The phone would ring and I'd let it. Not to punish. Not to scare. Just to give myself space to breathe before I decided whether I wanted to pick up. Sometimes I didn't. And when I did, I no longer filled the gaps in their conversations. I let the silences sit. If they called only to say hello, I smiled and said it back. If they asked how I was, I said, well enough, and left it there. I no longer gave them the soft landing they were used to. The cushioning of I understand. I'm just glad you called. I know you're busy. I didn't lie to smooth their guilt. Not anymore. I went through the house and began a quiet clearing. I donated the toys my grandchildren had long outgrown, but never asked about. I packed up the high chair, the storybooks, the plastic cups with faded cartoon faces. Boxed them gently. Labeled them, things once cherished. I took down the family photos from the hallway. Not out of bitterness, but out of honesty. Some of those smiles belonged to a version of us that no longer existed. And I needed space for the woman I was becoming. One who didn't live in waiting. I replaced them with paintings, soft watercolors I'd bought years ago at a flea market and never hung. Forest paths, empty benches, birds mid-flight. They spoke to me now. Of peace. Of motion. Of letting go. Eleanor noticed the difference first. She came by one afternoon with a batch of almond cookies and sat in the living room, looking around. You've been changing things, she said softly. I nodded. Just making room. She smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't need translation. I spent more time at the library. James had helped me set up a little email account. He even printed me a schedule of the community workshops, one on memoir writing, another on gardening in small spaces. I signed up for both. I started waking early not out of habit, but out of want. I'd wrap a shawl around my shoulders, make a mug of tea, and sit by the window with a pen in hand. Not to journal, just to write whatever came. One morning I wrote, I am not fading. I am blooming, just in a season they do not visit. And I pinned it to the fridge. Some days, the loneliness still curled around me, especially when the snow fell fast and heavy. But it no longer felt like punishment. It felt like space, like air I could finally fill with my own breath. My daughter stopped by once, unexpected, flustered. She stood at the door, gift bag in hand. Said she was sorry for not calling first. I said it was fine, but I didn't invite her in right away. Not out of cruelty. Just to remind myself that I could choose. That this was my home, and access wasn't a given. It was earned. Eventually, I did let her in. She looked around, noticed the missing photos, the unfamiliar artwork, the cleared shelves. Her voice trembled a little. You've been changing things. I nodded. Yes. Why? She asked. I didn't answer right away. Then I said, because I've changed. She didn't know what to say to that. We sat for a few minutes. She asked if I was upset. I told her I wasn't angry, just awake. She left not long after. And I didn't cry when the door closed. I just felt calm. That was the shift. No more convincing. No more chasing love through closed doors. No more shrinking. I started walking around the neighborhood in the late afternoons. Wrapped in my coat and scarf, I'd take slow laps past the houses where other lives hummed, dogs barking, dinner smells drifting through cracked windows, porch lights flicking on one by one. Sometimes I'd stop and watch the light change. I no longer needed anyone to join me. And yet, sometimes, James would wave from his porch and walk beside me a while, telling me about school or asking about the books I was reading. I never asked him to. He just came. Freely. That meant more to me than any holiday invitation. One evening, as the wind picked up and scattered leaves across my feet, I realized something simple but deep. They hadn't just stopped including me. They had stopped seeing me. And in return, I had started seeing myself. Not the mother. Not the grandmother. Not the keeper of recipes and reminders. Just me. Eleanor said it best, over coffee one Tuesday. You didn't disappear, you just stopped shouting into their silence. I smiled into my cup. Because that's what it was. I hadn't left the family. I had simply returned to myself. And in doing so, I was no longer invisible. It was a Thursday morning when the email arrived. From a sender named Library Workshop Team. Simple, polite. An automated confirmation. You are now enrolled in Writing Your Story, Memoir for Beginners. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I was surprised, but because the act of saying yes to something just for me still felt new. Tender, like a fresh bruise not from pain, but from the unfamiliar stretch of self-recognition. I printed the email and pinned it next to the note on my fridge. I am not fading. I am blooming, just in a season they do not visit. The workshop was held on the second floor of the town library, a room with windows that looked out over the old oak trees and the narrow creek, that curved behind the building. There were 8 of us, all women, most older than me. Some quiet, some chatty, each holding a notebook like a secret they weren't quite sure how to share. Our instructor, Miriam, had kind eyes and a soft voice, the kind that didn't command but invited. She asked us to write a memory from childhood, something that still visited us now and then. I sat in silence for a moment. Then I wrote about my mother's hands. The way she rolled pie dough in winter light, humming just under her breath, a melody I'd never been able to name. I wrote about how she always wore a soft green sweater that smelled like lavender and flower. When I finished reading it aloud, my voice barely above a whisper, no one clapped. But Miriam met my eyes and simply said, "That memory is a kind of inheritance. You honored her." And I felt something loosen inside me, like breath I didn't know I'd been holding for years. Later that week, Eleanor invited me over for tea. Her living room smelled like cinnamon and lemon, and her new cat, a striped little thing named Gloria, wound herself around my ankles like we were old friends. "I've started writing again," I told her, sipping from a porcelain cup. "I knew you would," she said without missing a beat. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a little wooden box, the kind that looked like it belonged in an attic or inside a fairy tale. Inside were old letters, dozens of them, yellowed and creased, tied in a soft blue ribbon. "I wrote to myself," she said. "After George died. After the kids stopped calling so often. I'd write letters as if I were still whole. And somehow, I started becoming her again." I held one of the envelopes gently, reading the faded handwriting on the front. "Dear me, you are still here. And that matters more than they know." I closed my eyes and let those words sink into my chest like warm sunlight through the window. When I got home, I dug through the bottom drawer of my nightstand and found an unused journal. The cover was plain, deep maroon with no markings. I opened to the first page. I didn't write about the betrayal. Not yet. Instead, I wrote about my feet. How they ached less now that I walked each afternoon. How I had started noticing the birds again, a red one that sat on the fence every morning. How I had finally thrown out the expired spices in the cupboard, making space for new ones I actually used. I titled the entry, "The Life I'm Choosing." And I smiled, because even though nothing around me had changed, no phone calls had suddenly resumed, no apologies had arrived, I had changed. And it showed. One morning, James stopped by with a small envelope. "It's not much," he said, almost shy. "Just something from me and my mom." Inside was a handmade card. Construction paper, bold letters, a sketch of a tree with gold stars for leaves. "Thank you for always being kind to us. You feel like family." My hands trembled, not because of age, but because of what it meant. To be seen, not through bloodlines, not through old roles, but through presence. Real presence. I pinned that card next to the others. Next to the note about blooming. Next to the email confirmation. Next to the words I had written in my own hand. This was my wall of reclamation. No arguments. No confrontations. Just a collage of quiet proof. That I still mattered. That I still belonged, if not in their world, then certainly in mine. And in this version of life I was slowly building. Tea with Eleanor, walks beneath a winter sky, gentle words written by my own hand. I had found something stronger than forgiveness. I had found peace. And it didn't ask anything of me but honesty. Have you ever found strength in moments of silence? Let me know. It began with the smallest ripple. A voicemail from my son, his voice softer than usual. "Hey Mom, just checking in. Haven't heard from you. Wanted to see how you're doing." I listened to it twice. Not because I missed him, but because I didn't recognize the tone. It wasn't casual. It wasn't hurried. It was uncertain, like someone knocking on a door they were no longer sure they had a key to. I didn't call back right away. Instead, I let the silence speak for me. A day later, a knock at the door. Not my children, but a flower delivery. A boxy arrangement with a note clipped to the side. "Thinking of you. Love, Amanda." Amanda, my middle daughter. The one who always meant to call. The one who said things like, "You know we love you, right?" when the guilt set in. The flowers were nice. A little too bright, a little too rushed. As if picked by someone who didn't know my taste but wanted the gesture to shout. I placed them on the table. I didn't text a thank you. Not because I wasn't grateful, but because I didn't want to be predictable. That weekend, I saw a post on social media. A photo of all 3 of my children at a brunch table. Smiles wide. Captioned, "Sibling catch-up time. Talking life and family planning." Family planning. The irony sat sharp in my chest. They had planned around me for years. Now, maybe for the first time, they were feeling the absence. Not of a mother's presence, but of her permission. Because they had always counted on it. My quiet approval. My nodding from the edges. My willingness to let them narrate the family story, while I stayed tucked in the background like wallpaper, comforting, familiar, unnoticed. But now, I was rewriting the margins, and the consequences were beginning to unfold. Eleanor called me that Sunday. "Saw your youngest at the pharmacy," she said, almost playfully. She asked how you were. I said, "I imagine she's doing just fine. She was carrying tulip bulbs and a brand new journal last time I saw her." I laughed. Not cruelly, just truthfully. "She looked confused," Eleanor added. "Like she didn't know what version of you I'd just described." I told her, "That's because they don't know the version I'm becoming." It wasn't long after that when Amanda came by in person. No warning. Just her car in the driveway one afternoon, the engine clicking in the cold as she stepped out and straightened her coat. I opened the door. We stood there for a beat, neither of us sure what the rules were anymore. "Hi, Mom," she said. Her smile was too careful. "Hello." She looked past me into the house. "I brought some of those cookies you like, the almond ones." I didn't move to take them. She held them awkwardly. "Can I come in?" I paused, then stepped aside. Not as an invitation. Just a permission I could take back at any time. She walked in, took a seat like it was fragile ground. Her eyes scanned the room. She noticed the missing photos. The new art. The envelope of pressed leaves on the coffee table from my last walk through the park. She opened her mouth, closed it again. Then finally said, "Is everything okay?" I nodded. "Yes. You've been distant." "I've been present," I corrected gently. "Just not in ways you're used to." Her eyes welled. She looked down at the cookies in her lap. "Did I do something?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to say you did many things. You forgot. You ignored. You chose convenience over care. But I didn't. Instead, I said, "Sometimes doing nothing is doing something." She didn't respond. We sat in that silence. The heavy kind. The kind that can either break something or begin to heal it. She reached for one of the cookies herself, unwrapped it slowly. "You've changed," she said. "I have," I replied. And I smiled, not to soften the moment, but because it was true. She stayed for 15 minutes. Made small talk. Complimented the flowers she'd sent. When she left, she hugged me, tighter than usual. I let her, but my arms didn't cling the way they used to. I had learned to hold myself differently now. A week later, a letter came from my son. Not typed. Handwritten. Careful script, almost too neat. He said he'd heard through Amanda that I'd updated my paperwork. That I'd made changes. That he respected my wishes, but hoped I wasn't angry. He mentioned the land vaguely. Said, "If we crossed a line, I hope you know it wasn't meant to hurt you." No apology. Just a plea to understand their motives. I folded the letter and placed it beside the deed, in the same envelope labeled what they chose. I didn't write back. Because sometimes the only way to teach someone the weight of their choices is to let them feel the quiet they left behind. The consequences were clear. They weren't losing a mother. They were losing their version of her. The one who never said no, who never withheld love, who never asked to be seen beyond her utility. And in that quiet withdrawal, I wasn't punishing them. I was returning to myself. And it felt like justice. Not the loud kind, just the kind that grows roots. They came as a group, all three of them. It was early March. The snow had melted into tired puddles along the curb, and the trees were still bare. Not yet spring, not quite winter. The in-between season. The perfect time for something new to begin. Their arrival wasn't planned. At least, not by me. I saw the cars from the window, one after another. Amanda's sedan, then Thomas's truck, then Sarah's minivan with the cracked tail light. I didn't move to greet them. I simply turned off the kettle and placed 3 mugs on the counter, all facing forward. Let them come in through the front door, knocking only once before opening it like they always had. But this time I stayed seated. They walked in uncertain. 3 adult children, all carrying the weight of something unsaid. "Hi, Mom," Thomas said first. He tried to smile. "Morning," I replied. Amanda set a small gift bag on the table. "We thought we could sit and talk. Maybe clear the air a little." I nodded. "You're welcome to sit." They took their seats around the table, just like they used to. But the energy was different. Tense. Unpracticed. Like visitors, not family. Sarah began, her voice careful. We didn't mean to hurt you. That was never the goal. I know, I said softly. Amanda shifted in her chair. We thought we were helping, giving you rest. Space. You were giving me silence, I said. There's a difference. No one spoke for a moment. Then Thomas asked, why didn't you tell us you were upset? I looked at him, at all three of them, and let the question settle. Because I've spent most of my life being easy to love, I said. I filled the spaces you left. I made the excuses. I forgave before you asked. But this time, I needed to hear how quiet it got when I stopped doing that. Amanda blinked quickly, wiping at her eye. Sarah leaned forward. Mom, we know things have changed. But we're trying. I smiled gently. Trying doesn't undo choosing. You chose distance. You chose convenience. You chose each other. I reached under the table and pulled out a folder, the same one labeled my decisions. I slid it toward them. These are my updated papers. My will. My power of attorney. My medical directives. It's all in here. Thomas reached for it, but paused. You didn't want one of us? No, I said calm and clear. I chose someone who sees me, who checks in, who doesn't wait until things are missing to notice I was here. Amanda opened her mouth, then closed it again. I softened but didn't shrink. I'm not doing this to punish you, I continued. I'm doing this to honor myself. I have spent decades making sure you had a soft place to land. Now I am building one for myself. Sarah whispered. I didn't know you felt this way. That's because I never let you see it, I replied. That was my mistake. Not yours. But I'm correcting it now. The room was quiet. The only sound was the soft tick of the clock above the sink. I reached for the tea kettle and poured 3 cups. I'm still your mother, I said. I still love you. That hasn't changed. But I'm no longer going to beg for a place in your lives. Amanda let out a slow breath. I didn't know how far we had drifted, she said. I looked at her with the kindness that only comes after pain. That's the thing about drifting. It's not loud. It happens tide by tide, until you look up and realize you're on a different shore entirely. Thomas opened the folder, flipped through the papers, then closed it with a quiet thud. I respect it, he said. I wish you'd told us sooner. But I respect it. I nodded. That's all I ask. They didn't stay long after that. There was no yelling, no accusations, only the quiet realization that something fundamental had shifted. When they left, Amanda hugged me again, tighter this time. Thank you for saying it out loud, she whispered. I didn't answer. I just held her for a moment, then let her go. When the door closed, I didn't feel empty. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt whole, because the version of me that sat at that table, calm, clear, and unflinching, wasn't new. She had always been there. She had just finally been allowed to speak. And that, more than anything, felt like coming home. Spring came early that year. Not loud or showy, just small changes, the kind you almost miss if you're not paying attention. Buds on the edge of the lilac bush, a single robin on the fence post, the scent of thawed earth on the breeze. I noticed every bit of it. Because now, I wasn't waiting for anyone else to look first. I had started waking earlier, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. There's a softness to morning light that feels like a second chance. And for the first time in a long while, I'd begun living like each day was mine alone to hold. The kitchen stayed quieter now. No clatter of dishes from family visits, no last-minute adjustments for picky eaters. But the quiet no longer ached. It comforted me. My days were simple and lovely in their simplicity. I'd take my tea out to the porch, wrapped in that old green cardigan of Harold's I could never part with, and listen to the neighborhood come alive. I'd write in my journal, short thoughts, gentle truths, nothing dramatic. Just pieces of myself returned to paper. On Thursdays, Eleanor and I went to the garden center. She'd lost none of her opinions, nor her delight in finding a good bargain on tulip bulbs. I loved those afternoons, the smell of soil, the slow rhythm of browsing, the way 2 older women could take up space without apology. James still stopped by. He'd come over after school, laptop in hand, eager to teach me something new. We'd laugh often, real laughter, the kind that rose from the chest and left a glow in its wake. One day, he showed me how to create an email list for my writing group. Another day, he helped me scan my mother's old recipe cards. I want to make a little book, I told him. Something I can leave behind. Not for anyone specific. Just so it doesn't get lost. He looked at me and said, I think it's already working. And maybe it was. I'd started to feel less like someone wrapping up a life, and more like someone building it again piece by piece. The house looked different now. Not because I changed the furniture or painted the walls, but because I'd stopped decorating it for anyone else. I put out the good dishes when I felt like it. Lit candles in the middle of the day just because the scent made me feel calm. I played records again, old jazz, the kind Harold loved, the kind I used to turn off when company came because no one else liked it much. Now it played freely. I'd even set up a tiny table in the sunroom, a writing nook. Just a lamp, my journal, and a vase of daffodils. My own little corner. My own sacred space. My children still called, more often now. But I didn't let their urgency bend me. I answered when I wanted. I gave updates if I felt like it. And when they asked about the will or the land or the new arrangements, I simply said, "It's already settled." Because it was. Not just on paper, but in my heart. There was no going back to the woman who waited by the window, who made excuses for absence, who believed love was earned by being useful. Now, I moved from a place of dignity. Not distance. Just truth. Sarah came by one weekend with her youngest in tow. A surprise visit. The little one ran into my arms like nothing had changed, and in that moment, I was reminded, not all love needs rebuilding. Some of it just needs to be held gently. She asked to paint with me. We sat at the dining table, the one I'd stopped using for large dinners, and spread out watercolor paper. She painted a sun. I painted a small, quiet house with light in the windows. "Is that your house?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "It is now." Sarah watched us from the kitchen. I saw something in her face, not regret exactly. More like understanding. A slow realization that I was no longer waiting for their version of love to return. Because I had found something fuller. Something chosen. Something mine. When they left, the little one turned and waved. "I like your house, Grandma." And I whispered back, "So do I." That night, I made a bowl of soup and curled into my chair. No television. Just the sound of wind outside and the creak of this old house settling in. I opened my journal. Wrote 5 words. "I am not missing anymore." And meant every one. I often think about that plate. The one they left on the counter last Christmas. Cold, wrapped in plastic, a silent summary of everything they didn't say. It used to haunt me. But now, I see it differently. That plate marked the end of something I had been clinging to, the illusion that I needed to be needed in order to be worthy. It wasn't just a forgotten visit. It was a turning, a quiet moment that whispered, "You don't have to wait anymore." And I didn't. I stood up from that silence, not to fight, but to begin again. Not loud, not bitter, just awake. I still love them. I probably always will. But love doesn't mean giving away every part of yourself until there's nothing left. Now, my love has roots. Boundaries. A gate that only opens by choice. There is peace in that. There is power. I'm not the woman they used to know. The one who filled the gaps, softened every blow, made it all easier. I'm the woman who lit a candle in an empty room, poured a cup of tea, and said, "This is enough. I am enough." So if you're sitting in a quiet house, wondering if anyone will knock, if anyone sees you, if your worth has faded like old wallpaper, hear me now. You are not forgotten. You are not invisible. You are not what they overlook. You are what endures. You are your own. And sometimes being left out is what finally lets you step in fully to your own life. If you've ever felt unseen or forgotten, remember, your worth doesn't depend on their understanding. Share your story in the comments.